In response to the GTX 1080 being launched, the GTX 1070 soon to be launched, AMD has revealed the RX 480 GPU, the first Polaris GPU, and it's gonna target budget gaming rigs. At $200, you get the card with 5 teraflops. That as an idea is performance-wise between the 980 GTX 980, the card that I personally have, and the GTX 980 Ti. Then you get, when you look at the Nvidia, you get the 1070, which is better than a Titan X or on par with the Titan X, depends on the benchmarks you're looking at, and then the 1080, which blows everything out of the water. So the way I look at it, personally, when it comes down to it, the whole VR ready with AMD, that needs zilch. The VR at this point, yeah, it's awesome and all that, but who exactly is gonna get only a $200 gaming card considering the price of VR at this point? Just making that argument right there. But what's significant here is the RX 480 is a 1080p card. It will be able, in theory, right, but practice depends on how well optimized some games are, and that depends a lot on developers, publishers, on that, how much they care about that. But in theory, this new AMD card, will be able to max out most games at 60 FPS 1080p, which is where the vast majority of people game on, so that's a smart decision. The 1070 is a 1440p card. That's the idea. You play games 1440p 60 FPS. The 1080 is a 4K game card. It doesn't get to 60 FPS, not quite, but it's close. It's really close. I imagine something like a 1080 Ti will get 60 FPS 4K, let alone, getting more than 120 Hz at 1440p, just as a point to make right there on that particular subject. So that's where it stands. 1080 is a very expensive card, but it does give you 4K, almost close to 60 FPS at 4K. The 1070, 1440p, stable 60 FPS, and now the RX 480. I'm talking maxed out settings here, and the maxed out setting situation gives you 1080p 60 FPS. So those are the markets these cards are for. But I will make a point. I made it for the GTX 1080, and I'll make it for both the 1070 and the RX 480. Do not buy any of these cards stock. You'll get them more expensive, and you'll get weaker cards. Now, in Nvidia case, far more expensive than in AMD's case with stock cards, but still more expensive and worse cards, worse cooling, worse performance. Get like an MS card or an EVGA card. Wait for those to come out, and then buy them. That's a smart decision to make. Don't buy the stock cards. It's not a really smart idea to get stock video cards, regardless of who makes them, Nvidia or AMD. Still, it's an interesting approach, I guess, from AMD versus Nvidia. It's basically AMD abandoning everything besides budget gaming, at least for the moment, right? Obviously, they will have higher-end cards available, mid of the road cards, high-end cards. They will have those available at one point or another. They are working on them, but just not right now. They're focusing right now on budget gaming. So in essence, they've abandoned for this year. You can forget about AMD among high-end gamers. You can forget about AMD making any sort of progress there compared to last year, where their market share collapsed completely. Now, in terms of budget gaming, obviously that's been one of AMD's strengths for a long time. There have been people who have said that AMD would go for budget gaming, would focus on that rather than try and fight Nvidia every year when it comes to the mid-market and the high-end market, right? When it comes to the GPU wars, as it were. Basically, this card is probably similar to what Nvidia will release when it comes to the GTX 1060. I guess the good portion to take out of this is probably the GTX 1060 will probably be the same price point, similar price point when that comes out. Though I gotta wonder how many cards AMD will be able to actually make. How many will there be available with this? Because, going budget game and all that, good idea, good in theory. The problem is you need to make cards and you're making them at a cheaper price. I mean, how many of them can you manufacture, considering right now for the new hardware, the manufacturing lines are already pushed to the limit. In fact, the reason we had to wait so long for the new architecture from both Nvidia and AMD is that they had manufacturing problems. So I gotta wonder, how many cards will they have available? Because if they have a lot of them, if they have a good amount of stock, they'll sell these like cupcakes, and they might just regain their market share this year. If they don't, they have a problem. Obviously there's only limited numbers of GTX 1080s and 1070s. There's very limited numbers of GTX 1080s at the moment. There will be very limited numbers of GTX 1070s, and I expect there will be limited numbers, at least initially, when they launch, of GTX RX 480s. That's just what I think of it. It wouldn't be surprising at all. But if AMD can provide a good amount of stock, if it can provide a large number of cards, they might just claw their way back from their market share collapse that happened in 2015. And although they did gain a couple of percentage points market share wise in the first quarter of 2016, it's just a couple of points. It's like still around 25% market share overall, 26% in some articles, 23% in others. Just making the point. Really, it's about there, right? A quarter of the market share is AMD, the rest is Nvidia for Q1 2016. I know how this is gonna pan out. Obviously, you have to wait and see when it comes to this subject, but although it's got its own benefits, it only really works if you can provide the number of cards required to use that to your advantage. Because right now, this card is gonna be a very attractive card to a lot of people, to perhaps the vast majority of people, because it's powerful. It's more powerful than GTX 980, for instance. Not as powerful as the GTX 1070, but much, much cheaper, right? You are looking at the very least, and this is with the aftermarket cards, the MSI cards, the EVGA cards, not the Founders Edition bollocks that Nvidia has gone with. When you're looking at a card that's $150 cheaper, and it does mean quite a lot, to be quite honest on the subject. Hell, I'll readily admit it. I don't have a very high opinion of AMD as a company. I really don't. I think they've done a lot of shitty decisions that have led them to end up in this situation. People like to blame Nvidia. No, AMD dug their own fucking graves on this subject. They dug them year after year after year. So excuse me if I don't have a very positive opinion of them as a company, but I gotta admit, this card is attractive as a card because GTX 1070 is overkill, as it were. GTX 1080 is way overkill as a GPU. This one is, personally, I game 1080p 60 FPS. The reason I do so is there's no point for me to go higher, since that would screw up my YouTube videos, my Let's Play videos. Yeah, if you want to play higher, you have to record there, put that, or else you'll screw up your quality of the quality of your videos. So I could record videos, get a card for 1440p, but it's also far more expensive than just gaming in 1080p. Gaming 1440p is a luxury a lot of people, including myself, just don't care for necessarily. It would be nice, sure, but it's a luxury. It's too much. You need a monitor, you need a powerful computer, it just goes way higher in terms of cost. And yes, the tech media likes to hype this stuff up. 4K gaming, 1440p gaming, 140 Hz monitors, all that stuff. Most people will not care for it. What they will care for is, at the moment, in a couple of years it will be 1440p, and years after that 4K eventually. But what they care about right now is 16 FPS 1080p gaming. And if they can get a card that's very well priced for 1080p, that card will sell like cupcakes. So in a sense, good move from AMD, good counterattack, and they might just succeed with this if they can provide the number of cards required to take advantage of that particular market. If that happens, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I wouldn't expect it in the short term, though. At launch, if you're expecting this to be available, well, you know, at the end of June when it's launching. And quite frankly, you're not paying attention to what's been happening over the last couple of years when every single GPU has launched. There's always limited stock. That's just how the cookie crumbles, as it were. Anyway, Costin here on Serious Gaming signing out, and stay tuned for more. Nice punch back from AMD after getting knocked on their asses by Nvidia. So we'll see what happens in the end.